Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me a couple of friends from long ago, Daniel McAdams and as well as Jeff Deist, both former staff members of Congressman Ron Paul. Welcome, both of you, to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I sort of titled today's show, The Economic Consequences of Our Military-Industrial Complex, and it seems to me that what we have is a military run amok. I guess empires do that. We are not told that we're an empire, but it seems as though we are, based on I guess it's something like 126 countries or something like that, Daniel, that we have some sort of presence. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds about right. It's about 125 too many.
And so what are they doing there? What are we doing in those countries?
Well, we're all through Africa, that's for sure, even though the Congress doesn't seem to know about it unless a Special Forces guy gets killed. But ostensibly it's the war on terror, although now Defense Secretary Mattis has come out with a new defense strategy saying that terrorism is no longer the threat, really. It's actually Russia and China. So I don't think anyone knows. We're just at war with everything, Jay.
So terrorism has been defeated, we're told, by our President Trump, and so it's now Russia and China that are what we have to be concerned about. Is that the new thing? And so how are we going to do that?
According to the new national defense strategy that was introduced by Secretary Mattis a couple of days ago.
So how are we going to address that, I wonder?
Lots of contracts with the military-industrial complex. That's the short answer.
So as long as we keep those guys, the money flowing to those guys, everything is okay, I guess, huh? Or not okay. We can't have everything okay, then the money has to stop going to those guys, right? We have to have some boogeyman.
That's true, and it's always been right. I mean, this goes back to the Wolfowitz Plan of 1994. The U.S. at the end of the Cold War had absolutely no idea what to do. All the people, all the Sovietologists, all the experts who had made a good living off of the Cold War suddenly faced unemployment and, even worse, a diminishment in their notoriety as great experts. And so Wolfowitz in 94 came up with this plan that the United States is now the sole superpower and that our grand national strategy would be to use whatever it takes to prevent any other power from challenging the U.S. as a superpower. And, of course, that's what's being brought back into play by Mattis and by the military and neocons around him. They're resurrecting this. This was always the big enchilada anyway, and this is now back in play.
So that might explain then why we won't allow China to patrol their own sea lanes, I suppose. That we shouldn't allow China, a country of that magnitude, even to have the right to control its own sea lanes, I suppose. And nor
is Russia allowed to be concerned that essentially a fascist coup government is in power next door in Ukraine.
Right, one that our NGOs were responsible for helping to put there, I guess, right?
And the U.S. government and Victoria Nuland, who now has an extremely well-paid job in the, quote, nonprofit sector.
Daniel, to what extent, when Donald Trump ran for office, he talked a lot about reining in NATO, having countries pay for NATO's expenditures. He was very vocal about not getting involved in places like, he was critical of Iraq and Libya. To what extent, if any, do you think that he's toned down, or has he? Or is he even more aggressive than Obama in some of these ways, in some of these areas?
Well, I think, unfortunately, candidate Trump has reversed his positions. And we deal with this a little bit on today's Liberty Report, Dr. Paul. But I think what happened is, for lack of a better term, what we term as a deep state, the permanent government, the military-industrial congressional complex, they became terrified at Donald Trump's rhetoric as a candidate. And I think they determined that, A, he must be prevented from winning, and when he shocked the world and actually won, they decided that, B, we have to do everything we can to undermine him. I think that is the core of the Russiagate scandal. We're seeing more and more of it come out as these texts are being released, and the ones that haven't been, quote, lost are being released from the FBI. We're finding out that that the collusion was not with Russia. The collusion was among the U.S. intelligence community to prevent a president from being seated or from lasting in office who really threatened their way of life. It is a coup in America. There's no question.
All right, so Trump is threatening the establishment in America, probably threatening in some ways. Do I hear you saying that he may be threatening the military-industrial complex? Or do I understand you in saying that, Daniel, in some way, one way or another?
Well, he threatened the gravy train. The gravy train is that everyone has their wits scared out of them, and they agree to $1 trillion military budget every year. The reason why Loudoun County and Fairfax County are right next to Washington, D.C. are the wealthiest counties in the country because this is the core of the military-industrial complex. So you have a lot of interrelated interests that do not want us to go off of war footing. And I think that's what President Trump hit head on when he became president. And I don't know if he blinked or if something more nefarious happened, but unfortunately he has stepped back quite a bit from his very oftentimes excellent campaign rhetoric.
All right. So, Jeff, is there any do we really know how much the military spends?
I think we don't. A lot of it's hidden. Ostensibly, the quote-unquote military budget's about $825 billion a year, mostly to the DoD. But there's more to it than that. A lot of our what it amounts to military interventionism, spending for that, is hidden in places like foreign aid budgeting and State Department budgeting, in some unholy trade deals. So I would argue that we spend roughly $1 trillion a year on meddling because it's not really defense. Nobody's threatening the United States militarily. Let's be honest. Mm-hmm. So we spend the U.S. federal government spends about $4 trillion a year. Right now, so-called defense is about $1 trillion of it. Social Security and Medicare, for which there is zero popular will to tinker, account for more than $2 trillion together. So we're rapidly reaching the point where, as a country, all of our spending is going to be consumed. All our government spending is going to be consumed by entitlements and war, and especially this will be true if interest rates are forced to rise to keep people interested in buying our Treasury debt, which I suspect and which our leaders at the Fed tell us is indeed going to happen over the next few years. So what right now is about a $300 billion annual expenditure in the federal budget on interest on the national debt could very quickly begin to double or triple and become $1 trillion. So you start to look at all of these other things that American people imagine they're going to get from the government, like ag spending and welfare spending and AFDC and housing and energy and all these things, and they're quickly being squeezed out because we have this atavistic, bizarre need to police the world. And what's so interesting about it is that even as we're told there's this huge divide in America between red and blue, between rural and urban, between Hillary voters and Trump voters, in fact, there's this awfully comfy little comity in the Beltway and neighborhood, and people who know the Beltway will know neighborhoods like Chevy Chase and Kalorama and D.C. and Great Falls and Bethesda. And here you've got progressives and conservatives living quite comfortably together based on one universal shared premise, and that is that the gravy train will continue to float down the river. And that's what Daniel's getting at when he says the gravy train, because it's a bipartisan affair.
Yeah, it would certainly seem that way, which may account for a lot of the Republican legislators not seeming to be all that comfortable with some of the things Mr. Trump has said.
No, they're very comfortable in certain ways. If you look at their reelection rates, if you look at the gerrymandered districts in which they live, and if you look at their relationships with their donors, this isn't some sort of bizarre conspiracy. It's quite out in the open in FEC reports. You can look up who gives what to whom. So it's on us. It's not a conspiracy. Yeah.
Well, what seems really troublesome to me, we're seeing the interest rates start to rise again. I believe that that interest rates are rising in large part just because it's the nature of the cycle in markets. The Fed has some control of the short end of the yield curve, but as you say, Jeff, we've got to finance this deficit. Americans, we've been able to live beyond our means for quite a while. First the Japanese and then more recently the Chinese were buying treasuries. The Chinese have made no bones about their dislike for doing so. Why would they like it if we take the financing from their savings and use it to patrol or get involved in their own part of the world and not allow them to patrol their own sea lanes? One thing I read this last weekend, I believe it was, that the Australians are becoming uncomfortable now with their relationship with the United States to a certain extent, in that the Chinese are putting some pressure on them. Why would the Aussies continue to support America and America's military presence in that part of the world when it means that they lose their markets to China? So I'm wondering to what extent, if either of you have any thoughts on the geopolitics and what role that may play in the dollar, because if the dollar starts to become less attractive, and it's down 10% or so last year, if it becomes less and less attractive, the ability for foreigners to attract them to buy the dollar, even at higher interest rates. We saw this in the 1970s, the late 70s. We had to have interest rates go to double digits in order to finance and get foreigners to send money to the United States so we could continue our extravagant behavior in Vietnam and elsewhere around the world. Jeff, any ideas on this? Because we're reading about the decline of the petrodollar. China's supposedly starting now the yuan petro yuan. They have their own gold trading system. In Shanghai, they have a futures trading system for oil and for gold. It seems to me that there's geopolitical things that are coming into play here that could really start to cause some trouble for us financially, in addition to these other things that you just pointed out, Jeff, the debt that we have, this $4 trillion debt. Any thoughts on that, Jeff?
Well, it's a complex process, but the bottom line is that there's no market amongst the American public for these wars, especially in the Middle East. These are deeply unpopular wars. The only people who support this stuff are largely the people in the Acela corridor between D.C. and New York. So these wars are financed not on a pay-as-you-go system. Imagine if George W. Bush had told America in the early 2000s, look, we're going to invade Iraq to get rid of Saddam Hussein. We all know this is worthwhile. So we're all going to pitch in, and every household's going to be dinged $300 a month to pay for this thing until it's over, because I'm a conservative and I don't believe in deficits. I mean, it would never have happened. One of the biggest untold stories of America in the 20th century is how the Fed enabled government growth. And one part of that is this wilding federal policy of interventionism around the world. It enabled entitlement growth as well. But foreign policy is a big part of it. And connecting the dots between the Fed and our foreign policy, again, not a conspiracy, but it requires a little bit of thought and a little bit of study. So it's not the stuff of sound bites for our candidates, to put it mildly.
Yeah. Daniel, in terms of what's going on in the Middle East and Europe and so forth now, that part of the world, I believe there's a general consensus that the United States is losing some of its influence. In Syria, for example, it seems as though, of course, the neocons and the establishment is decrying the notion that we are losing our influence in the Middle East. Do you see it that way?
Well, I think we are, and I would just like to underscore what Jeff said earlier about the Fed in its relationship to our militaristic foreign policy. It's an absolutely critical issue. Pardon me. But the Middle East, it's the same as you mentioned Australia earlier. The issue, and I'm going to paint with relatively broad strokes, but U.S. foreign policy has become one of, listen, you do what we say or else, full stop. Mm-hmm. And it has worked because the U.S. market is extremely attractive to people who want to trade with us, but it's becoming less so. So you see a situation like Iran. The Trump administration is desperate to cancel this deal. That's the one area where Trump's been consistent, canceling the deal with Iran. in the past, they could have easily relied on the Europeans to walk behind us lockstep. It's not so easy right now, and Trump is finding it's rather difficult because the Europeans are engaging in a lot of trade with Iran, and it's very profitable. And they're seeing the Chinese and Russians move in for a very big market of 80 million people. And so now the Trump administration, by continuing with this forget the carrot, it's stick or stick mentality toward the rest of the world, is actually finding itself more isolated. As Dr. Paul always says, really it's the interventionists that are the real isolationists because they're isolating us from the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I know that there was at one point in time when Obama was pushing forward the Iran deal, Kerry was making a statement about how Europe was going to get upset. He says, we asked the Europeans to cooperate with us and to engage in, to disrupt their economic relations with Iran. And now we're going to walk this back, and we're not going to go forward with this Iran deal after they've made those sacrifices. And he gave a very stern warning. He says, if you want to realize that people are already angry about our dollar and how we're using it, that the dollar may lose its preeminence as a result of that. He was making that threat that the dollar hegemony may be threatened because if we act this way. So it seems to me that there's a lot of interrelated parts here, and it's connected with finance. I really think that if you put how could the Australians really? I mean, we're putting them in a pretty tough spot if we're requiring them to give us bases or whatever else we want in order to be able to disrupt Chinese activity. And if the markets are there for Australia, if they're in China and not, all the way on the other side of the earth where we are, it's very interesting. Jeff, any thoughts along those lines?
Well, look at a map. Australia is a lot closer to China than it is the West. It's full increasingly of Asian immigrants. Mm-hmm. So that part of the Pacific is none of the United States' business. And the fact that there are historical ties between Australia and England is so far in the rearview mirror at this point. They have every right and every incentive to view themselves as part of a Pacific trading bloc, which includes China and Japan and Korea. It would be crazy for them not to see themselves that way. And frankly, this filter through which we're supposed to view all American demands as wholesome and good for the world. I mean, why is it good for China to have the dollar as the world's reserve currency? It's good for me. I like to buy cheap stuff at Walmart, but why is it good for China? This bizarre sort of inability amongst our modern Georgetown class at Foggy Bottom to consider that other people around the world have differing interests and to anticipate that, the level of bellicosity is really disheartening.
Well, it's disheartening, and it's kind of understandable, though, in a way. Although, why is it that more Americans don't think about it? Or I guess maybe if everything is going along well for you, why would you want to disrupt it? I suppose, but if you look at the bigger picture, it's hard to see, how other nations aren't angry with us. But isn't this what empires always do? Don't empires keep running until they keep moving in the same direction until some natural forces sort of thwart their activities?
Well, Jay, that's the silver lining. Sometimes empires die quickly in terms of human history, but over a period longer than any one person's lifespan, so that none of us really necessarily suffers the full realization of it. So I sure hope that the United States is not that hell-bent on ruling the world, that it can't see that in the future we need a different kind of foreign policy. We need to scale back the rhetoric and the reality of nuclear weapons, first and foremost, and we need to stop invading countries that disagree with us and get back to an idea of the United States as an example for the world rather than a bully. in the world. I don't know. Is human nature such that we'll continue blindly along this path until something unpleasant happens to us? Maybe so, but people had an opportunity to vote for Ron Paul twice.
Yeah.
And they were seriously looking at people like Barack Obama, John McCain, and Hillary Clinton. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So this is the world we live in.
Well, they don't know Ron Paul like you and Daniel know Ron Paul, and I think but they don't know Ron Paul because to a certain extent, because they weren't given an opportunity to. I think or they didn't seek him out. Is Daniel still with us? I know he had to leave a little early. Is Daniel still there? Daniel, are you there?
He ran off.
He ran off. All right. Well, yeah. All right. Well, I just Daniel and Ron Paul, the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, do great work. I would suggest that the people listening to this show tune in to that program from time to time. And Jeff, you also do wonderful work there at the Mises Institute. Who have some of your guests been most recently? And you certainly talk about the economy from an Austrian point of view, which I think is the closest economic model to life as it really is, the natural laws of economics and physics. But who have some of your guests been of late that you...
Recently, we've really been trying to hit on this theme of decentralization, subsidiarity, and localism, which was a theme to an extent for Ludwig von Mises. While he certainly had a universal perspective on some things, he condemned universalism in other areas. Rothbard, of course, talked about the difference between the organic nation and the artificial state, which oftentimes has boundaries or borders that resulted from a war. So we've been talking to some guests like Michael Bolden at the 10th Amendment Center about decentralization. We've also been trying to reach out to some right conservatives and left progressives on the issue of the Fed. There's a couple of examples. Daniel DiMartino Booth, who I would sort of call a Stockmanite right populist, and my friend Nomi Prinz, who I would no offense to her, I guess I would call her a Bernie progressive, but yet they've both written incredible books about the depredations of central banks and how they create inequality and how they create distortions in the marketplace and malinvestment. So it's interesting. One thing that Trump has done is he's changed the goofy left-right continuum and the goofy left-right debate we were suffering under for so many years. He's changed that a bit. And it's fun to see areas where we can agree with progressives in the Trump era, for example.
Yeah, well, that's really good. Well, we've had Danielle DiMartino Booth on this show. I think you've also had Alistair McLeod on your show recently, perhaps sometime, or he's written some things at least for the Mises
I think we
Institute.
Published some of his stuff. So we're at this point, what I would term libertarianism is more about ideas than ideology. I don't think ideology is serving people right now, and I think there's something in the American psyche, a good thing, a remnant. Part of the American spirit is that we're a little suspicious of dogmatic ideology. We're not big fans of isms, and we have kind of a results-driven mindset. And I think that's good for liberty, because I think markets work in ways that top-down government doesn't. And if that's the best way to sell liberty to people, then fine. Not everybody has to be some sort of ideological warrior who reads books all the time. So I'm hopeful that the next couple of years we'll see some realignments because of all this distress with Trump.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope some good comes from it. It certainly has stirred things up. There's no question about that. I just remember reading a piece. I think it was posted at the Mises Institute by Alistair McLeod, in which he went back and looked at some of the work of von Mises in terms of the inflationary episode in Germany, the hyperinflation, and Alistair was drawing some parallels between what was going on pre-World War I in Germany and what's going on in the United States now. I thought it was very, very interesting, and in fact, part of my talk in Vancouver was built off of his talk, off of some of the ideas that Alistair had. Well, Jeff, I want to thank you very much, and thank Daniel. He had to leave for some personal things. I want to thank both of you for being with us, and look forward to having you again sometime soon. Soon as possible, as soon as we can work you in, because you do an awful lot of great work over there at the Mises Institute. People that want to support the Mises Institute should go where? Mises.org?
Just come to Mises.org, and you'll find a lifetime worth of reading, and all free. So please familiarize yourself with our site if you haven't been to it.
And you do a great weekend show, too, I think, almost every weekend, don't you?
I do a weekend show every weekend, absolutely.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for being with us.